Okay. Did you hear anything? Thanks, Renee. Okay, cool.
Good afternoon. I am Jackie Madison, the president of the North Country Underground Railroad Historical Association, and I want to welcome you to the Solomon Northup's Day Virtual Celebration 2022. Today's program was underwritten by historian, author, and artist Nell Painter, and thanks to the generosity of the Adirondack architectural heritage. We are broadcasting from downtown Keysville via the tech magic of our producer and vice president, John Mitchell. We just heard a lovely selection, and you may still be hearing some of it, from violinist Enrique Prince, who is zooming from Jamaica, Queens. Mr. Prince will return for a mini concert midway through our program. Thanks for joining us today in recognition of the captivating story of Solomon Northup, an African American man born free in Minerva, Essex County in 1808, abducted into slavery in 1841 in Washington, D.C., and transported to Louisiana. Director Steve McQueen's critically acclaimed 2013 film, based on Northup's autobiography, 12 Years a Slave, made the 19th century New Yorker a global celebrity. We celebrate Solomon Northup's Day, an annual event launched in 1999 by then Saratoga Springs resident and Skidmore College alumna Renee Moore, who lives in Washington, D.C., where Northup was abducted. Renee will set the tone for our program with her opening remarks. But first, let's learn a little bit more about Renee. Renee Moore is writer, educator, activist, and lecturer. Her career has taken her from the halls of Congress to social worker, educator, and later historian. Her commitment to the community has been as an organizer, project manager, and program coordinator for cultural and political events. Renee is most noted for Solomon Northup's Day, a celebration of freedom that she founded and directed beginning in 1999, based on Solomon Northup's autobiography, 12 Years a Slave, written in 1853. The Library of Congress recognized her work with a reception in May 2000 and placed the story of Solomon Northup in the Permanent Archives collection at the Library of Congress Folk Life Center. Thank you. We will now hear from Renee Moore. While we wait for Renee, I'll have some additional information on her. Can you send her in the chat? Is there a chat to send her saying she's muted? Tell her I'll reintroduce her again if she likes. Okay. I said to go in the chat. Can you unmute her? Nay, she founded and directed Solomon Northup Day as a private individual in 1999. This project for 15 years honored the legacy of Northup's life based on his 1853 autobiography, 12 Years a Slave, and that of all African Americans as a part of American history. On May 23, 2000, as part of the National Bicentennial Celebration, Local Legacies Project, Renee, along with other Americans, were honored at the Library of Congress, Great Hall, Washington, D.C. Northrop's story is now part of the permanent archives of the Library of Congress Folk Life Center. These projects are documented for their merit and contribution to the community and are featured as testament to the uniqueness of our nation and to the pride of its citizens in their heritage. This um, on speaker. We have her stuff.
she done? Should I turn my video on? Okay. All right. All right. Hopefully you can see both of us. Let me unmute myself. I'm going to try the unmute. If this is echoey, we're going to turn it right back off. Okay. How is that? Are we echoing? All right, so hi, I'm Tracy Edwards. This is my student, Lucas. What we're coming to talk to you about, oh, there we go, hello. So what we're talking to you about today is a research project we did on the Underground Railroad, which actually made a stop in our tiny little town where we have class. And there was a church in the town that had a history of helping assist the enslaved fugitives as they were trying to make their way to Canada. Our town happens to be about 15-ish miles from Canada. Typically, as if you're familiar with the Underground Railroad, what the people would do would be get close to water, and we're not close to water, but sometimes, as you all know, well-laid plans don't go well, so they would come to our town. So I'm going to hopefully be able to share my screen with you, because what I wanted to, oh, it says host disabled screen sharing. Could you allow screen sharing, please? So what I wanted to do is just show you kind of our process, and there we go. So hopefully in a second you'll be able to see our screen, and I'll be able to point a couple things out, and Lucas will interrupt me because I know he'll know when to do that. Okay, so let me get back here. Back to my little, do you see my screen at all? Okay, so let me try again. Okay, it keeps saying that I'm in here somehow. Can you see my video? Okay, let's try again. It says share screen. We'll hit share screen this time. There we go. All right, thank you for being so patient with us. All right, so hopefully you can see, I'm going to minimize this. Hopefully you can see the screen I have. And what you're looking at is the First Congregational Church in Malone, New York. And this picture over here, I hope, can you find my, let me see if I use this. I hope you can find my mouse. The first church that we're looking at was actually the second church built. There were several churches on this same site, and they were built for a couple of different reasons. The first one, I believe, burned. Is that correct? And so the second one that is right here in this picture in the left-hand corner of the screen was, so the runaways would get to this point, and there would be a wooden false floor, and they would open up, it's kind of a trap door, they'd open up the trap door, and they'd go into this little tunnel. Now, we did try to get into this, Lucas, and how big is that tunnel?
It was only like 1.5 feet tall.
Yes.
It wasn't very big.
So you would have to be, first off, probably smaller than me to get through it. And if you had a child, for example, if you had someone with you, if you had any sort of belongings, this was a very tight squeeze. And you had to travel about, I would say maybe 60 feet. There was a sharp turn that would take you in a completely different direction. And once you got out of that tunnel, you would be underneath these stairs right here. And they would typically stay there for a night, maybe two. They'd have to fumble around and find a candle, light the candle, and just hide until the conductor came to get them, to bring them to the next place. So one of the things we discovered, though, as perhaps many of you are aware, there was not a lot of written information. And why was that, Lucas? Why couldn't we find written information about, like, how many people went through there?
Illegal to do what they were doing.
Yes, because the church was breaking the law. The church was breaking the law, trying to help, and the church, and this was really kept quiet. There are rumors that all throughout our village, there are several tunnels going from house to house that would take you out and hide you away, secrete people away. But the problem, of course, is that because that was illegal, nobody was keeping records of their illegal activity. One of the things my students discovered that they found kind of eerie and interesting at the same time is that one of the places you might come out of the tunnel would be in the cemetery right next to the church. And so that's another way that they would be able to, after dark, come out up in the cemetery and then be able to be brought to the next place. So what I'm showing you in this screen is our process. This was our Jamboard. And so a Jamboard is just a whiteboard. It's a digital whiteboard, so students can, well, anyone can, this isn't the one I wanted to show though. Anyone can just kind of, they can collaborate together. So these are the, that's the first one. I'm trying to get to the second, and I'm sorry that we are, oh goodness, it does that to me. So tab. I guess it's not going to let me do that. So hang on a second. I can take us to the next place, and then we will talk about our process. So this is all of our Jamboards for the class. And this particular Jamboard is where all of the students kind of collaborated and they worked on presenting different things. And I just wanted to show one of the, there we go. So these were the search engines we used. We went to North Country, the New York Historic Newspapers, the archives, which is online. That was one of our sources. We went to the Library of Congress. We used New York State Archives. JSTOR is another place that we found some information. We went to the National Park Service. There was information on the National Park Service. And we also used a few other places. I'm not really sure where this link is going to take me, so I'm not going to click that. But we found several different sources for our project. And so that's pretty much in a nutshell what our project was. Things that we learned about our county. Oh, and so what we did in discovering our project was we found these quilt blocks, these quilt squares. And the quilt squares had different meanings. And we do realize that there's some controversy over whether the quilt squares were used or not used. But we had discovered several different scholars that said that they were used. And so we took that and we kind of made that a centerpiece for our project. And we made our own versions of these quilt blocks right here. And we have that, and we've donated our quilt block display to the North Star Underground Museum, Underground Railroad Museum in Keysville. So so these were the meanings of the quilt blocks. I know that I did the bear's paw, and that one is about food and where to find food. I know that Lucas, what was yours about? It's not in our symbols here, but what was one of yours?
Sailboat.
Sailboat. And what was that for?
Mental waterway was nearby.
Yes. So one of the things that we discovered, one of the students made this to talk about the different titles of people in the Underground Railroad, but one of the students that we had in class this year is, she's a dual citizen of Canada and the United States. And so she looked at the Canadian perspective, and one of the things that she discovered from the Canadian perspective was that the Canadians weren't necessarily thrilled to have this huge influx of immigrants. They felt that the immigrants, that they were, the same way many people look at immigrants now, that they might take their jobs, that they might take things from them. And so even after getting all that way, even 1,000 miles, however many miles it took them to get from the South to Canada, they were not necessarily treated they weren't welcomed necessarily. And so that's one of the things that our project discovered too. Yes, but that is our project in a nutshell. We had it on display, and we talked with Robin about it. We've done different things with it to kind of put the word out about the history, and so that's kind of what we did. Lucas, do you have anything to add to that?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and mute myself again.
Thank you, Tracy and Lucas, for finding us, despite GPS's desire not to get you here. So next up, we will hear from Mr. Prince again for a mini concert. But before we do, I would like to tell you a little bit about him. Enrique, aka Rique, was born in Harlem, New York City. He began playing the violin as a child and completely immersed himself in both classical and the rich American folk violin styles. Later, he studied classical with Charles Mecham of the San Francisco, or Mecham, of the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra. Since Rique's father and uncles were band leaders in the West Indies, leading successful dance bands, this legacy would prove to be a rite of passage for Rique's destiny. He would, over 40 years, perform fiddle tunes solo and with others, thus creating his own dance band of string-based folk music, known initially as the Enrique Prince Duo Trio, and then later the Ebony Hillbillies, which was named by its first bassist, Dave Colding. Rique also played with numerous charanga bands, jazz ensembles, reggae bands, and guesting with such pioneers as the Sun Ra Orchestra, alternative country band, the Palace Brothers, and with the late night television Saturday Night Live band. Nevertheless, his heart always brought him back to the old-timey string band tradition. Rique, take it away.
Well, I can see your hands moving. That's Mhm.
Is that Rolling River? Ooh,
No, that was that last thing was actually Hog-Eyed Man, which is a tune of the period for sure. Hog-Eyed Man. Hog-Eyed Man is a boat, a barge, you know, that's since so many slaves escaped the misery of slavery by escaping to British ships and becoming seamen. They've been doing that for quite a while, since before the country became a country. And because I think and river were two barges. A Hog-Eyed Man is a flat bottom boat. So maybe Solomon knew about those. Maybe he stepped on a barge or two on a river down in Louisiana. Might have. So there. Very
Yeah.
nice talk, Renee.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Enslaved Africans or enslaved humans instead
New
of
World Africans who also happen to have been enslaved.
I become sensitive to it. Enslaved Africans or enslaved humans. There were no slaves. Anyway, I'm
Anyway,
some humor here to various subjects. It's our story.
it's our story.
Our
All
story.
the, all the Canadian info was kind of disheartening, but it fits the period. So anyway, who is next?
There are so many stories out there.
Mm-hmm.
Rike, are you going to give us another selection?
I really wanted to emphasize that we as a people owe so much to our ancestors and to each other. And I think if we realize true Africanness, we could behave ourselves better. That's why
That we should behave ourselves better.
I'm sticking to it.
I would if we would. It would be great. Yes.
Well, my trips to Africa, multiple, and Europe and places now, I've seen real continent, African continent in various countries, and the way they treat one another is,
In Africa,
yes,
well, I don't think they have control of that. You know what they say? It's the economy, stupid, and their economies are definitely.
they have an obligation. Well, they do seem to have a really clear connectedness to each other, and
Mm.
that I don't feel here in the United States, but I feel that I see it and feel it, particularly in Senegal, which is a predominantly Muslim country, and I certainly saw it in Uganda. Ugandans, Ugandans are particularly racist, but
Excuse
their
me,
children are
Renee, but this was
Did you say?
Rike's
Excuse me.
time for
Did you say the
music.
Ugandans were particularly racist?
racist, racist,
Racist, as in
racist. Wait a minute.
who are they racist against?
Gracious.
Oh,
Gracious.
gracious. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I was really getting confused.
Yes, that's confused.
That's a big difference.
No, they just have so much respect for each other and respect for their elders and their children, and I really and we have way more material, as in, and we have plumbing. We have plumbing, but I think there's a there's a lot to be said about the Africanness that we got disconnected from and brought here as descendants of slaves, and our want wanting to be accepted has stripped us from our roots.
You know,
Screaming, some people, and in others, I'm Justin. Am I screaming?
screaming is good. I can.
Am I screaming? Can you hear me?
I
Now
can.
I'm echoing.
Now, see,
Well,
there's no happy medium.
you know, I recently participated in a Pinkster celebration,
Yes.
and you know Pinkster, right? And so much in New York State where it was banned actually at one time because it got so big. But at the time of Pinkster, Africans celebrated African things. Those people in the 1600s, 17, when they were doing that, when they had their day off as enslaved Africans, they were celebrating as Africans. They got to do African things, fun African things. And they danced, and the different people who knew who their tribes were danced the different dances of their tribes, and they did these different things. It was a real African expression right in the middle of all of this going on.
To the music. Next, we will learn from Solomon Northup descendants Vera Jackson Williams and Justin Gilliam. Vera Jackson is a descendant of Solomon Northup and founder of the Solomon Northup Foundation. The Solomon Northup Foundation believes it is essential for all Americans to understand the social, psychological, and financial challenges African Americans still face today as a result of the forced slavery our ancestors endured. Yet their contributions paved the groundwork for the economic infrastructure of our country. Vera has a master's degree in information systems, over 35 years experience as an IT specialist, IT project manager, and IT management positions within Fortune 500 companies and the federal government. She has 3 adult children and 7 grandchildren. Justin is the 4th great-grandson of Solomon Northup. He is the CEO of the Solomon Northup Foundation and has worked closely with the founder and president of SNF to develop the business infrastructure of the foundation, overseeing social media, marketing, IT, and operations at SNF. Justin keeps the Solomon Northup flame burning through education, awareness, research, and has been the voice of the foundation, along with other descendants, supporting the effort to preserve the Shoko Bottom historical site in Richmond, Virginia. Justin was a key contributor in developing and implementing the Walking in Solomon's Footsteps in Washington, D.C. bus tour. He has been an IT professional and business consultant in the Washington, D.C. area for over 15 years. Justin is married to his wife, Sharita, and is a proud father of 12-year-old Azalea Ann Gilliam and 2-year-old Alexander Amir Northup Gilliam. Justin is an alum of the historic Howard University and has been interviewed by global TV and newspaper reporters, providing presentations on his ancestors and continuing outreach and education efforts through the foundation. He is a very captivated communicator to younger and other demographics and generation. Welcome, Vera and Justin.
Association and the museum as well for having us for this annual Solomon Northup Day celebration. It is a great honor and pleasure to be here with you today to speak about our ancestor, to talk about our foundation, and just a little bit more information that you might not have known. Just as a backstory to how we present or how we present in general, we like to invite you into our home. As you can see, we're in my mother's home now. You see the awesome poster from the movie behind us. So you get to see something that most people don't. But we want to bring you into our home today and have a conversation with you. Have a somewhat informal conversation as we would have had for myself growing up and my mother growing up throughout the generations. So just a brief overview of our presentation today. We're going to be talking about the lineage, our line of ancestry to Solomon, as well as how we both were introduced to Solomon's story. We're also going to talk about some descendants of Solomon, his legacy. And we're then going to go into our foundation, the Solomon Northup Foundation, some of the things that we've been working on, some of the things that, as was mentioned in our introduction, our bus tour, some books, and some things that we're working on coming here in the future. And then we look to open it up for questions at the end. So we're going to go ahead and get into our presentation. I'm going to have my mother Vera go over the lineage for you and show you how we're connected.
Okay, so I want to introduce you to a lady by the name of Emmanuel Northup. Emmanuel Northup had 3 sons, George, Carr, and Captain Henry. Captain Henry was the owner of Mintus, the slave. And when he moved to upstate New York, he later passed away. He also had, excuse me, he also had 2 children, John Holmes and Clark. So, and John Holmes had a son by the name of Henry B. Northup, and he is very instrumental later on in the Solomon Northup story. Henry B. Northup and Solomon Northup knew one another. So Henry B. Northup and Solomon ended up knowing one another and kind of grew up with each other. In 1798, when Captain Henry passed away, he freed his slaves. And by freeing his slaves, Mintus Northup, who was the father of Solomon Northup, who was also married to his wife, Susanna, they had children, and their children were born as free individuals. So they were born free individuals, but they were set free because their father, Mintus, was set free from slavery. So Solomon goes on to marry Anne Hampton, and they had 3 children. Solomon also had a brother by the name of Joseph. And again, Joseph and Solomon, they were born free individuals. Solomon goes on to have children, Alonzo. Alonzo, by the way, married his wife. Her name was Catherine Victoria. And he had the 2 children, excuse me, I'm sorry. He had 2 children, Elizabeth, and I'm sorry, we're talking about Solomon. Solomon had Alonzo, Elizabeth, and Margaret. Moving on to the next level of the lineage, Alonzo then had a son by the name of John Henry. John Henry, he married a lady by the name of Agnes Parker. Agnes Parker had children, and one of those individuals, John Henry had, and Agnes Parker, they had my grandmother, Victoria, and her son, Victoria, and her brother, Henry and Robert. Victoria, my grandmother, went on to have several children. Of those several children, there was Alice, Agnes, my mother, Laura, my mother's brother, Joseph, her sister, Carol, Richard, Sharon, Cheryl, and Kathleen. There was a whole lot of folks in that generation who were born into the family through my grandmother, Victoria. And so my mom, Laura, had 4 children, Robert, Vicky, Vivian, and yours truly, Vera. And I myself have 3 grown children. You've met Justin already. Justin is the youngest. And he has 2 of my grandbabies, and that is Azalea, 12 years old, and Alexander, 2 years old. And so that's how we went from Solomon's father, which was the furthest we knew back in our lineage, Solomon's father, Mintus, all the way through to where we are today and where my grandchildren, how they fit into the story. So that's a high level overview, if you will, of the lineage of the Solomon Northup, Mintus Northup, the family.
So in our lineage, we have 6 generations. Is that correct, Mom?
Yes.
Awesome. So we have 6 generations descending from Solomon. Just a little bit more context about the lineage. My mother mentioned Henry B. Northup, who was the son of Captain Henry, who grew up with Solomon. In the movie, it's depicted at the very end when Solomon is saved that there's a gentleman that comes. You don't really know who this gentleman is, but in fact, this is Henry B. Northup. Henry was one of the first people that got word from Solomon that he was in the situation, enslaved and held captive in Louisiana. So with the help of the governor of the state of New York, Henry became deputized and actually got papers from the Recovery of Slaves Act to go and recover Solomon from Louisiana. So there's a little bit of context behind that. A lot of people don't know who this gentleman is coming to free, or so to speak, rescue Solomon at the end of the movie. They embrace each other, so it's obvious that they know each other, but you don't really get the full context of who this person is. Moving a little bit farther down, I thought it was very interesting that from Renee's talking points earlier, how Frederick Douglass and Solomon both married women named Anne or Anna, and that Mintus's wife had Anna in it as well. I thought that was interesting as well. Anne is somewhere in there, and funny enough, you can see or you can hear through our lineage that we use the same names over and over again. Agnes comes up several times. Joseph comes up several times.
Alonzo's wife, her middle name was Victoria, and then his daughter, his granddaughter, my grandmother, ended up with the name of Victoria. So again, those names are repeated. And then my sister, Vicky, who is the oldest girl of my immediate family, her name, Victoria, is named after. So again, the names are just repeated throughout our lineage. You wanted to say something about the Negro baseball?
Oh, we're going to get to
Oh, you're going to get to that?
We'll
Okay.
get to that.
Okay.
So in the next portion of our presentation, we wanted to kind of talk about how we were introduced to the story of Solomon Northup.
Thank you.
I'll start off with myself because it's a little closer down the line, so to speak. But so when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and as I was learning how to read, my mother gave me 2 books, one of which was the book Putting On for Old Massa. In this book, she told me that there were slave narratives in this book, and that it would be important for me to understand where these people came from, to help us understand where we're trying to go. And again, as a little kid, that was a lot. It was a lot, but I understood what she was trying to get at. And as I started to read these stories, and it's interesting enough, these slave narratives were easier for me to read. They were not so complex with very hard words. So it was a great introduction for me to tighten up, strengthen my reading skills. And as I'm reading this, she's telling me, Justin, you actually have an ancestor that's in this book. And she reveals to me that this ancestor is Solomon Northup, and that I am the 4th great grandson of him. And so she starts to open up the story of Solomon being a free man and living the American dream, what most of us strive to reach within in our lives, and me starting to form those ideas of what that meant. What does the American dream mean? What does that mean to my community? What does that mean to society as a whole? And started to help me understand that not only what happened to Solomon was horrific, traumatic, that we still lived in a time where I could be affected in similar ways. And while I might not have been kidnapped, we also know that modern day slavery, human trafficking, is rampant right now. So the reality of it was very real, very real. My 12-year-old who I let out to go play with her friends, it's something that I constantly think about when she walks out that door. You know, it is her safety. So my mom trying to help me understand that, you know, while this world is full of love, appreciation, community, village, tribe, that there are still people out there that have ill intentions that will try to take advantage of your talents and use them against you. So that was my introduction. It later on turned into the perfect token for me at every African American Black History Month event that I'd have. And, you know, when we did reports in school, I had a special link to an ancestor, which most people, you know, didn't realize or didn't even know if they did at that age. I come to find out in my adult life that the reality of it is that we all have unique stories. And most of us are tied to some significant story that we're maybe not even aware of. And it's important that we teach our younger generations, just as I'm taught Azalea and who will be the next face of Solomon Northup Foundation later down the line. And my son, Alexander Amir Northup Gilliam, will have the same information imparted to him as he grows up and he starts to learn and be able to read. This will be one of the first books that I'll give him as well. So that's a little bit of how I was introduced. Mom, what's your story?
So let me share with the folks out here how I learned about Solomon Northup. I remember as a younger child, I guess around 7 years old, I used to always, you know, like to listen to my grandmother and my mom and my auntie. They would have their tea in the kitchen table and they'd always have these conversations, and I'd be sitting on the floor playing with my dolls. And I was the youngest, by the way, child. So I had a kind of special liking to be around, you know, mom and grandma and auntie. Anyway, so I would always hear them, you know, talking periodically about somebody by the name of Solomon. And I'm like, who is this Solomon that you guys keep talking about? And so one day, finally, I just spoke up and I said, you know, who is Solomon that you were talking about? And they realized at that point that I had been listening all this time to what they were talking about. And so that's when they started telling me about Solomon Northup and how he was related and what happened to him. And I felt so awful about something happening where somebody was taken away from their home and not able to see their mom and dad anymore. And that stuck with me for a very long time, the story. And later on, my grandmother was able to acquire a copy of the book that Justin was telling you about, putting on Old Mesa, the three slave narratives and one book. Can you reach that real quick?
Yeah.
So, so my grandmother, she got a copy of that book for each one of her children, and she wanted them to know.
Wow. I have that book.
It's right here.
Oh, you have the inside of it. Yeah.
It's in here. And then I've got this book wrapped in tissue, and along with another book that's wrapped in tissue, because these books are very, very near and dear to me. And they've got a lot of history in them, because my grandmother actually bought this book for each one of her children, and she signed the book for each one of her children. Now it's a little bit old and tattered, but this is the actual book that my grandmother gave my mom, Laura, and she actually wrote inside of the book, to Laura, with love from mom. So this is my actual grandmother's book that she gave to my mother many, many, many years ago. And I eventually ended up reading this book to learn more and more about Solomon Northup. Very, very, handle it very gently. Should I wait
Yeah, let's wait till the end because we want to show you another book and we want to introduce some other books to you as well towards the end of our presentation. But thank you, Mom. I thought that was great. You know, every time I hear you say you tell that story, it's like I'm still just in awe. I hope that my kids feel the same way when I tell them, you know, my story. I saw Judy mention that she was going to give her 9-year-old granddaughter the book, and I think that's an awesome idea. Of course, read it with her, so that she can understand some of the harder things that are in that book. Renee mentioned meeting my great grandmother, my mom's grandmother, Victoria, and how sweet of a woman she was, and how near and dear she really is and was to our hearts. In the next section, we're going to talk about some of Northup descendants, some of those significant people within our family that we wanted to bring up to you today, and how they're connected and what they did. Back to the lineage, before I get into descendants, I thought it was very important to mention that Renee also mentioned how Frederick Douglass had descendants that went into military service. So that's a very common theme during this time period, because Solomon's son, Alonzo, also was in the military service. The other child that is seen at the very end of the movie, not Elizabeth, who was with child when Solomon came home, but his other daughter, Margaret, her husband was actually in the military as well. And they relocated to the Norfolk area of Virginia, Southern Virginia. I was actually just told about this by my mom. This is information my mom had mentioned to me just not too long ago. And I thought that it was poignant for this presentation. And so I thought it was so interesting that Renee brought that up as well. But Alonzo, his military service is documented actually on a statue that sits across the street from the African American Civil War Museum in Washington, D.C. It's actually just a few blocks from my alma mater, Howard University, in the Shaw District. Across the street lies the African American Civil War monument, the statue. And on there, it has the different infantry and battalions that were a part of the colored troops.
Yes.
And the 26th Infantry has our ancestor's name listed, Alonzo, in that section. We actually have pictures to show that and commemorate that. And as a part of just a little piece, but as a part of the tour that we give that was mentioned earlier in my introduction that I helped create. Someone else that we wanted to talk about is John Henry, Alonzo's son. John Henry, interesting, my grandmother's grandfather, all right? Interestingly enough, he was a part of the Cuban Baseball League. Now, for those of you familiar with the Negro Baseball League, this was a competing league. So a lot of times it was hard now they didn't compete with the normal baseball league at that time. It was all whites at that time. So their competition a lot of times came from other associating leagues that were majority minority. So the Cuban League was one that was competitive with the Negro leagues and actually ended up fusing together over time. A lot of these teams ended up combining and creating new teams. So he was a part of that, and we thought was significant to mention as well. The next portion that we wanted to go into is kind of where we come into play. We've talked to you a little bit about our lineage. We've talked to you about our ancestors, our descendants, some of the things that they've done, our personal stories, and how that set the trajectory for where we are now. Right before the movie came out, we're all pretty much familiar with the movie 12 Years a Slave. Right before the movie came out, we were fortunate enough to go to the Solomon Northup Day that was hosted at that time by Skidmore College, and really saw a need for descendants to be more involved. And so we picked up that mantle, and as did many of our other family members as well, who are doing amazing things across the country. So I don't want to at all take away from them or what they're doing. And we had several conversations with a lot of them as well. my mother and I, as well as two other members of our family, Clayton Adams and Eileen Jackson, decided that we would form the solid.
Maureen.
I'm sorry.
Maureen. I was thinking about Maureen.
She wasn't a founding member, but she is also, we have other family members that contribute as well to the foundation that we are more than appreciative and thankful for. My mom just mentioned one of our cousins, Maureen, who has done a number of things for the foundation in trying to help us, get to what our mission really truly is, right? Which is keeping the flame burning. So in conjunction with today's day, we also wanted to talk about the fact that, so we are based in the DMV area, the Washington, D.C. area. Right now we're in Maryland. I technically live in Virginia, but we meet a lot in D.C. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up was that we actually have a Solomon Northup Day that was proclamated in D.C. as well by the current mayor, Muriel Bowser. This was done the day before and in conjunction with the opening of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. And so we were honored to be a part of that and included, and it's something that we continue to celebrate every year. The other portion that I wanted to talk about is some of the things that we're doing as a foundation, some of our passion projects, some of the things that we work on a daily basis. And so as we all know, Solomon's final resting place is still unknown, right? We are fortunate enough to know where Mentis is, but our goal is to eventually lay Solomon next to his father, as he mentions at the end of his book. So we continue to work at that as we try to fundraise and gain contributions from the public and the community so that we can continue to do that research, that much necessary research. Just a little side note on some of the research that we've done. We've gotten leads and tips throughout the years. One of them more recently was that there was a belief that Solomon was buried in a cemetery in Omaha, which is just a couple of miles from Council Bluffs, Iowa. And a little bit more context, the reason why this area is significant is this is actually where Elizabeth and her husband moved after they have their baby. They moved to the Council Bluffs area, which is, again, just a couple miles from Omaha. My father's side of my family is from Omaha. So I thought it would be a great opportunity to go see family and try to track down family. I thought this was a great excuse to knock two birds out with one stone, so to speak. Upon me getting to Omaha and tracking down the cemetery, it was actually from an article that was published in the paper in Council Bluffs that a gentleman had mentioned that he believed that Solomon's final resting place was at this specific cemetery. Upon me arriving to the cemetery, they wanted to point out slave markers to me. Now, at that time, they did not put the names of the slaves on these tombstones. It was just a marker, and then they had a registry that would list any information about them. If they did have a name, who their owner was, what year they died, and so on and so forth. Well, my understanding was unless Solomon had been recaptured and been made a slave then, he would have had his name on the tombstone. He wouldn't have had a blank marker. So it kind of, as you can imagine, put a little bit of a dead end. I went through all the registries and I could not find any mention of his name or if he was actually at that cemetery. So for some reason, by chance, if he is actually there, there is no marker or no indicator of that. So we continue to search. We don't believe that that's actually where he is. We believe that it was the ending of a story that someone wanted to create more traction from. But we continue to get leads and we continue to follow up on them. Some of the other work that we do as a foundation, as mentioned in my introduction, are bus tours that we facilitate in in the Washington area. We go to several different locations that were significant to Solomon while he was here and ultimately kidnapped in this area. How it relates to what these modern day landmarkers are. My mom has some significant connection to one of these areas, well, two of them really. And I'm actually going to let her talk a little bit about what that significance is. We're not going to go too deep into it because we'd love for you to all come to our tour eventually one day. But we would love for you to go ahead and tell them what that significance is.
Just one little teaser maybe is that we also have on our website some information also about the bus tours, and there's some pictures of a couple of the sites. But two of the sites that are on the tour that are very near and dear to me, that I did not know that I had this affiliation with these two sites. One of the sites was when Solomon woke up from being drugged from that infamous drink that he had when he met up with his two friends who actually arranged for him to receive this drink that was toxic. And when he woke up, he was in a place called William Slave Pen. And William Slave Pen is a notorious slave pen, was a notorious slave pen in Washington, D.C., and it was known by a lot of people. As a matter of fact, that the restaurant that he went to where he received this drink, it actually also too was one of those sites in Washington where individuals were encouraged to go, and it was a wonderful restaurant. But what they didn't know too was it was owned by, that restaurant was owned by a slave trader. And so he would get individuals who were free like Solomon or had some type of affiliation, and they would go there to the restaurant and they would be pointed out, and then that person would be given a drink and they would wake up like Solomon did at this slave pen, William Slave Pen. Well, the relationship to the William Slave Pen and myself, I used to work at a government site for about 2 years as an IT specialist. Didn't know it at the time that I had a relationship with this government site. Come to find out, this government site that I worked at was the Federal Aviation Administration. And to this day, there's a huge sign out in front of the Federal Aviation Administration about Solomon Northup and his story. So I had no idea while I was walking in that building, the government building, as an IT specialist, that I had an affiliation with that. And it just makes me so proud to go down there today. And okay, can I tell them it's a stop on the tour?
Well, I'm sure they know now. I mean, at this point, I'm sure they're aware. I just wanted to kind of make a couple of corrections in some of the terminology that we like to use, right? We want to also use these opportunities, these events, these presentations to change the narrative, so to speak, right? How we speak about ourselves, how we refer to ourselves, how we refer to, for example, we're not fugitives, but enslaved or captured to that extent. Also, wanted to mention that the hotel my mom was speaking about was the Gatsby Hotel. Thank you, Renee, for adding all those
Thank you.
Tidbits. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
And so just wanted to make those few small corrections. In addition to the bus tour, there are also tours in Louisiana as well, in the Avoyelles Parish. Our cousin Eileen was fortunate enough to go down there, as well as my mother, go down there and meet with the community, meet some of the descendants of some of Solomon's captors, enslavers.
We rode the tour.
Rode the tour down there. Now we do not facilitate or host this tour. This is done by the city of Avoyelles themselves, or the parish of Avoyelles themselves. They also erected a marker to signify the road that this tour is a part of and Solomon's story. So we've got pictures standing next to that marker, which is pretty awesome. I look back on those quite often.
And one last little tidbit too is that so we really literally walked in his footsteps in Avoyelles Parish as well too. The site of the plantation where he worked at. We also walked in his footsteps there. Today, of course, it's not it's a plantation. It's not a plantation. It's, you know, a piece of land that's owned by someone who farms that land today. But amazing to be able to walk on in those footsteps, knowing that Solomon actually walked there as well too.
Mhm. That's awesome. Yes, thank you, Mama. Excuse me, I'm gonna refer to my mom as Mama. Everything else except for what her name is, because this is my mom. But another quick correction is Renee wanted to add that she did the event in 2013 at Skidmore, and they graciously picked up the event for 2014 and 15. Is that correct, Renee? Okay, so I just wanted to again clarify that. You're on mute if I can't hear you, but if you type it for me, I'll I'll read it if there's a correction. I can't I can't hear you. So in the next portion of our presentation, we want to talk about some of those books that we mentioned earlier. We want to show you a very special, near and dear book to us. So Mom, if you wanted to go into some of the books that we have.
You want to say that one? Save those.
Yeah, save the book for last, and we'll show them these books.
Should we start out with the Son of the Northup book? Your Foundations book?
Sure, let's start out with our Foundations book.
Okay, so this book here is, you see, 12 Years a Slave, and this book is a republication of Solomon's book. When the movie came out, I was approached by this publisher, and they asked me if I would be willing to write the foreword in a book, 12 Years a Slave, that they were going to be publishing. And of course, I was wanting to know, I was, excited to hear that, but I also wanted to know, how could Solomon benefit from this, So for every book that we sold and or we asked folks to make a donation. If they made a donation, we gave them the book for free. And so this was one of the books that we used to help provide funding to the foundation. And so in this book, I wrote the foreword in this book, as well as Justin and Jamie and other descendants. They've written their, a little something to the person who's either made a donation, and or paid for this book. So this book is very near and dear to the foundation, and as well as it allows us to continue sharing the story, keeping the flame burning through the foundation.
So just a little bit of clarity on this one. She mentioned that we had signed it. So my mother did the forward, and all of the representatives from the foundation sign each book that is procured through our website. So this book is available on our website at SolomonNorthupFoundation.com, and that's why this is really important to us. The next book we wanted to talk about is, how about this one? Because this one's very important. This is
Okay, and Renee, I'm sure you're very much aware of this book, Sue Eakin's book. Sue Eakin is kind of known for, and help me, Renee, I know you know probably a lot more about this, but Solomon Northup's story was written, and it was kind of like lost for many, many, generations. And Sue Eakin, as a little girl, was visiting someone's house and ran upon the story, 12 Years a Slave. And she read that, and it stayed with her. By the way, Sue Eakin was also a professor at LSU University. And so when the story stayed with her for many, many years. So she she took the story and got it reprinted. And so it kind of brought Solomon's story back to life, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so I remember receiving this book when I was in college. And this book was given to me by one of my cousins, Clayton, gave me this book. And so this was a story. This book was one of the books that resurrected the 12 Years a Slave story.
Yeah, as Renee added, she resurrected the autobiography, and that's how it got republished.
Yes.
Now it's in the public domain. So yes, we're so happy about that. And as you can see, I've got quite a few books. So there are a number of books that are, and we don't have all of them actually. So here's another. Let's go through this one.
Oh, yeah.
next.
Got
This
to
is a
tell you
very
about this one.
important book.
This one, and Renee, I'm sure you're familiar with this one as well too. The Complete Story. This is an awesome book. It takes you through the story that Solomon wrote, but it also gives you a lot of detail that I learned a lot by reading the book, by talking to my Aunt Carol, my mom, my grandmother. I learned an awful lot. This story also filled in a lot of the gaps that I didn't know about. So this book is called The Complete Story because it talks about, when when Mintus, when he was alive, Solomon's father, and how he was manumitted or he was set free, and when that happened, those type of facts, those type of detail, I really did not know that much about, but I got the book. And one of the gentlemen who was a contributor of this book, Clifford Brown, he's a professor also at, it just left me the name of his school. Okay, but he's
Union.
Union
Thank you so
College.
much.
Union College. Thank you, Union College. He's a professor at Union College, and he's a very near and dear friend of the family. And he's a contributor of this book. And he got my Aunt Carol to write the introduction of this book. And my aunt wrote into this book something to me, giving me this book. So this wonderful copy, wonderful edition, lots of information. If you're interested in, a lot of detail type of things, it's in here. It's definitely in here.
Awesome. This book, just really quick. This book is in conjunction with the tour in Avoyelles Parish and a lot of the things that were going on down there. This is the Northup tour guide. So this shows a lot of the landmarks, the marker that they erected, the replica that they created of the enslaved quarters and the enslavers' quarters. And the other person that you meant to also mention is David Fisk.
Oh, David,
David
yes.
Fisk as well.
And Rachel.
And Rachel Slegman. Yep.
Yes.
Yep, Rachel Slegman as well. So here are two more books. Here's a children's book as well. This is not the book that I read growing up, but this was published later on. And actually what we, as a foundation, just to kind of fast forward a little bit and some of the things that we're working on as a foundation, is we're trying to create another children's book, one that is a little lower in the age range. So for kids that were my age to better understand, I thought that would be great. And this is something that me and my mother talked about. I said, well, it would have been great to have a children's book that spoke more to me at my age. And she agreed that yes. So that's something that we're also working on. And then there is this book as well.
So this book, 12 Years a Slave, it's the actual story. But this book is the 160th anniversary edition. And just read you a little bit at the front here. It talks about Solomon Northup's true story as a free man from Saratoga, New York, to slavery in Avoyelles, Louisiana, 1841 to 1853. And it's published from the Louisiana town, which confirmed his freedom on the 106th anniversary of his release. Myself, Eileen, and Eileen from California, and myself, we traveled down to Avoyelles Parish during this time. So it was an exciting, very exciting opportunity to be a part of that. Okay.
Awesome. So
last of all,
last book that we want to show you is again very, very near and dear to our heart. I'm gonna give this to my mother very gently, and I'm gonna let her show you guys.
Okay, so this is the Gem of Gems. This is a Solomon Northup, 12 Years a Slave, first edition. We got this book when we attended the
2013 Solomon Northup Day.
2013 Solomon Northup
Same
Day.
year, and Renee reminded me, it was the same year that Lupita came.
Nyong'o from the movie.
Lupita Nyong'o from the movie came and presented us with a trailer to the movie. And the whole family got to meet meet her. And I honestly, I did not know who she was. I thought she was a cousin of ours. And I said, well, let me sit next to this beautiful young lady that I have never met before, but I'm sure I'm going to get an interesting backstory. And then the presentation starts for the celebration, and she gets up, and I'm like, what's going on here? But have been fortunate enough to connect with her at other screenings as well. My mother and her mother have become friends over the years, which I always think is really awesome. My mom was going to tell a little bit of the story of how we got the book.
Okay, so someone came up to me at this event and said, I don't know if you're interested, but I hear that there's a first edition book here in Saratoga Springs. And this is the name of it. This is the address. And I just felt like, oh my gosh, what an amazing opportunity. I wonder if they would be willing to sell the book. It was a bookstore that had this book. And the next day, in Saratoga Springs, yes. And so the next day, Justin and his little girl Azalea and Eileen, and so the four of us, we went over there and to this bookstore, and we asked about the book. They really didn't know anything about it, and so I pushed a little bit more and asked them if they could maybe call the owner of the store and inquire about this book. And they did. And he came to the store, and I told him who I was, what I was doing there, and I was really interested in this book that he allegedly had. And he said, it's not only allegedly, but yes, I do have the book. And I said, well, we would like to buy the book. We are
now add in that this book wasn't in the bookstore.
Right.
This book was actually at his home with him.
Right.
So that's how special this book was, not only to us, but him as well. He knew the type of gem he had.
Yes.
So go ahead.
And he ended up, selling it to me for a fair price, and so now the family has the first edition of 12 Years a Slave as a copy.
So yes, we're very, very proud to have this as an heirloom in our family. And we'll continue to try to preserve it. We keep it wrapped up in all kind of tissue paper. We put it in a lockbox, and it'll probably go into a bank vault at some point as well. Now, funny story behind that too. We mentioned that we had artifacts at the Smithsonian, the African American Historical and Cultural Museum, and they have a book as well. Now, they requested our book. They knew we had a first edition, and the curator who personally reached out to my mom and spoke with her, Mary Elliott, asked her if she would be willing to loan the book out. Now, if you know how museums work, a loan is almost like a permanent, it's almost like a permanent loan. They expect to keep it. The sale of Solomon's book was second only to Uncle Tom's Cabin. That's right, Renee, with the gems, with the information. We appreciate that, definitely.
Thank you.
So yes, they actually have a second edition book at the museum, and we have a first. So we kind of hold that over their heads a little bit. But
can I put in a plug?
Go ahead.
So if you've seen the movie, but you've never read the book, I would like to encourage you to go to our website, SolomonNorthupFoundation.com, and order the book, and I will ship it to you. I have copies of the book, and for, of course, a small donation to help us continue to keep the flame burning, not only on Solomon Northup's story, but the story of our ancestors. Okay, the last thing that I have to say, and so I have to put in one other plug. I've been affiliated with a group of individuals who also are descendants of slaves who penned their stories. And the organization is called Inspired by Courage. And we have had the opportunity to go around the country to various museums, colleges, and universities. We went to Buffalo State up in upstate New York. We've been to the African American Museum over in Seattle, Washington, and other down in New York City at the museum down. We've been in lots of various places down in Virginia. I remember when you came. So we've been traveling around the country, just sharing our story of our ancestors. We don't want their stories to ever die. And so we're out here keeping the flame burning. It's called Inspired by Courage. Oh, by the way, there's a website, of course, called Inspired by Courage. So if you go out to your website and to your internet and you plug in Inspired by Courage, it'll take you to that website. It'll tell you a little bit more about each one of the individuals who are part of this organization, who have whose ancestors have penned their stories. So a lot of information, a lot of really good information. One of the individuals was Dred Scott's a descendant. She's a part of it. Who was it? I was telling you the other individual. I can't remember everyone's name, and I don't want to keep taking up so much time. But again, that information is at on the internet.
You can also go
website.
through our website to get to it as well.
Right. Thank you. There's a tab on our website for Inspired by Courage, and that'll take you right there. Thank you.
Now, one of the last things that I wanted to talk about before we get into Q&A is one of the projects that we're currently working on, which is near and dear to us. And actually, it will link back to the city of Saratoga Springs. But for the past couple of months, almost a little over a year, my mother and myself, our foundation, and some key contributors in the city of Saratoga Springs have been working on a statue. We're trying to get a statue erected in the city of Saratoga Springs. And so we're diligently working at that. Again, your contributions, your donations, your help, even your networks will all be helpful to us as we continue to try to pursue that. So we please look out on our website for more information about that, more events that we'll be doing. We plan to do a fundraiser in Saratoga Springs before the end of the year, and hopefully get to see a lot of you that have joined us virtually and in person there as well. So that concludes our presentation. We thank you so much again. We're honored that you allowed us to come and speak today about our ancestor. I thought everybody's portion today was amazing, from Renee to Henrique, just across the board.
The professor and the student.
Yes, the professor and the students pieces. Forgive me, I forget their names, but that was awesome as well. So we would love to open up the floor to questions. I'm not exactly sure how they're going to be fed to us. But also just to add some context, it looks like Renee mentioned that, the plaque, that there is a plaque currently in Saratoga Springs now in Congress Park. And we have pictures when that was erected, and Victoria actually, my great grandmother Victoria actually got to see that. So that was amazing. But yeah, we'd love to open up the door for questions. And again, thank you so much, guys, for having us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Very nice. Very nice.
Oh, Renee had a few books that she wanted to mention, so I'm not sure if I'm sure we have time. Renee, I think if you can unmute, I think you're still muted.
Am I muted? Uh-oh.
I think you have your phone on or something.
Yeah.
No?
No.
Hmm.
I don't think you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
You do?
We can hear you a little bit, yeah.
Very, very.
I want to thank Vera and Justin for sharing your heritage and giving us updates on ongoing developments in Solemn Northup discoveries and scholarship. And I would like to thank all of the presenters that taken part in this. We want to thank Adirondack Architectural Heritage for hosting us today in downtown Keysville. Enrique, if you're still with us, maybe you can introduce another song and tell us the time period, and we will close out.
Judy and Dennis Braden called A Stolen for children specifically. Again, this is the Sue Eakin book.
Rike, are you there?
Put out as the descendant of Sue Eakin, and a book I think really portrays the story of African American struggle and contributes from the great called The
Never.
Great Patriot by Dale Buckley, and it talks about African Americans involved in the whole military from the Revolutionary War to storm. So
Hey, Renee. Renee, can you hear me?
yes,
Hey, so it sounds like Robin asked Enrique to play another song as they close out. I don't think anyone could hear you on the other side.
okay, thank you, Justin. I can hear.
What was the name of that tune?
Oh, okay. I hope I was unmuted. Oh, the hands are moving. Okay, great. Thank you.
He didn't hear me.
Well,
What was the name of that tune, Rike?
that was 5 miles from town.
Thank you very much. Once again, I would like to thank everyone for zooming in with us today. And don't forget to come visit us at the North Star Underground Railroad Museum, located at 1131 Mays Chasm Road, Ausable Chasm. The museum is open Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. I am Robin Caudell, and I bid each of you a lovely rest of your day. Thank you.